health, psychology, and human nature with André Sturesson. Hey friends, hope you're having a great day. Are you following me on Instagram and Facebook? Please go to Health, Psychology and Human Nature on Instagram or Facebook, or both for that matter, to get the latest episodes, inspiration and more. Please take a pause and go there. Also, if you like the episode, please share it with a friend, family member, or somebody else who you think might like it. Welcome back, friends, to Health, Psychology and Human Nature with me, André Sturesson. A science-focused podcast where we explore, learn and improve our lives together. Health really begins at the cellular level, according to Professor Terry Wahls. Terry, she's a patient with secondary progressive multiple sclerosis, MS, which used to confine her to a tilt-recline wheelchair, actually for 4 years. But Dr. Wahls, she restored her health using a diet and lifestyle program she designed specifically for her brain, and is now able to paddle her bike to work each day. Dr. Terry Wahls, she's a clinical professor at the University of Iowa, where she conducts clinical trials testing the efficacy of therapeutic lifestyle to treat multiple sclerosis-related symptoms. In addition, she's also an author. She's written the book The Wahls Protocol, which just came out in a new edition. And she's also written the cookbook The Wahls Protocol Cooking for Life. Friends, I really hope you will enjoy today's episode. Okay, Terry, welcome to the show.
Hey, thank you for having me.
Thank you for taking the time. I think it's going to be a really interesting conversation, talking about MS, talk about your story, and also talk about other health-related subjects. So yeah, big thank you for coming on.
Yes.
And I think a very good beginning of this conversation would be to hear your story, because you have quite a remarkable story about MS and how you basically got your life back. So would you mind telling that story for a thousandth time?
Sure. So, and I think it gives people a lot of hope. So this all begins actually during medical school in 1980. I started having some episodes of discomfort in my face that were more frequent when I was more severely sleep deprived. I ignored them. And then in 1987, I'd finished residency. I was in practice. I had an episode of dim vision in my left eye. I had a big evaluation, no clear explanation, but I had to back off on my training because if I did an athletic event too vigorously, my visual acuity in my left eye diminished. My face pains were continuing, and again, had a big evaluation, no clear explanation. My face pains continued to be more troublesome. I saw neurology, tried a variety of drugs, and over time would end up taking some drugs called gabapentin for that. Then in 2000, I developed weakness in my left leg, and again had a big evaluation. I had MRIs of my brain and my spinal cord, and had lesions in my spinal cord, and one in my brain, spinal tap, and I was diagnosed with multiple sclerosis. Because I'm also an academic physician, and I know that MS is really a progressive disease, I knew I wanted to treat my disease very aggressively. So I did some research, found the best people in the country, took the newest drugs, and still I went steadily downhill. Now my neurology team told me about the work of Laurent Cordain. I read his papers, his books, and decided that his advocacy of the Paleo Diet made sense. And so after some meditation and prayer, because I'd been a vegetarian, low-fat vegetarian for 20 years, I went back to eating meat. I gave up all grains, all legumes, all dairy. So this was a huge change, but I continued to decline. The next year, I needed a tilt-recline wheelchair. I took mitochondria, which is a form of chemotherapy. I continued to decline. Then I took the new biologic drug, tizabri. I continued to decline. Then I switched to a variety of other very potent immune suppressing drugs. And that was very apparent to me that despite seeing the best people in the country taking the newest drugs, nothing was slowing my march towards potentially a bedridden life, potentially demented, potentially intractable pain. And so I went back to reading the literature, reading more basic science papers. And I would eventually start reading about Parkinson's, the animal models of MS, of Alzheimer's. And I would decide that mitochondria were really key because that's key in brain volume loss and spinal cord volume loss and worsening disability. So I focused on supplements that were supporting the mitochondria, and eventually would figure out how to create a supplement cocktail that helped my severe fatigue a little bit and appeared to be slowing my decline. By the summer of 2007, I was beginning to have problems with brain fog. I was quite weak. I really couldn't sit up in a regular chair anymore. If I sat in a regular chair more than 10 minutes, I was just flat out exhausted. I had a special kind of chair, a zero gravity chair at work, another one at home, where I could recline back with my knees higher than my nose, so gravity would hold me in my chair. I could walk about 10 feet using 2 walking sticks very slowly. Otherwise, I relied on that tilt-recline wheelchair. And it was clear that I was really on the verge of being forced finally into medical retirement. But it was that summer that I discovered the Institute for Functional Medicine. I took their course on neuroprotection, and I had a longer list of supplements, which I added. And then that fall, I had this really big aha moment. Like, what if I redesigned my paleo diet based on everything I'd been reading in terms of the nutrients that brains need and the things I was taking for my mitochondria? What if I redid my food to chase those nutrients, still using paleo principles? So I did that. I also, again, renewed my meditation, and I'd been working with my physical therapist this whole time. And we added electrical stimulation of muscles to my very simple, tiny little physical therapy program. And the results were really quite remarkable. Within 3 months, my pain was gone, my fatigue was gone, my brain fog was gone. And I was strong enough to sit up again. I could sit up at the table. I was beginning to get stronger. My physical therapist was like, well, you are definitely getting stronger. And we advanced some exercises. I started lifting weights. And I began walking around the hospital. First with my walking sticks and then without my walking sticks. At about 6 months, I got it in my head that I wanted to try biking again. And we had an emergency family meeting. My wife and kids, my kids were afraid because it had been 6 years since I'd biked. They didn't want me to lose my ground. But fortunately, my wife decided we could try. So she's going to have my son run on the left, my daughter run on the right, and she would follow in her bike. And I managed to bike around the block. My son's crying, my daughter's crying, I'm crying. And then at a year, I'm able to do an 18.5 mile bike ride with my family. Once again, my kids are crying, my wife's crying, I'm crying. And this really changes how I understand disease and health. It changes the way I interact with my patients in my clinic. And it will ultimately change the way and the type of research that I conduct.
And now you're helping others. I've seen that you've done studies on this. From my understanding
Yes.
is that you actually created the same protocol, and you're actually helping others, and you're doing studies to make sure that it works for others now as well, right?
Yes, yes. So we're into our 5th clinical trial. And so far, the first 3 trials were consistently showing that people could implement this program. That the biggest risk was that if you're overweight or obese, you lose weight without being hungry.
Yeah.
So that's a pretty safe intervention.
It's not the worst of side effects, I guess.
That appears to be the worst side effect, that your weight gets back to a healthy body weight. And if you're already trim, you are not becoming underweight.
Yeah, okay.
And, the first group of people that we studied were others with progressive, either secondary progressive or primary progressive MS. And this is the group of people, like me, I was in the secondary progressive phase. There is no spontaneous recovery.
Yeah.
That you expect people, once they've lost functions, that they will continue to lose at about 10 to 25% each year. And so if you can hold them stable at their level of disability or their level of functioning, that would be like a home run. A phenomenal home run.
Yeah.
And what we're able to show, in fact, was that as a group, we improved their energy, improved their verbal reasoning, their nonverbal reasoning, reduced anxiety, reduced depression, reduced fatigue, had this dramatic improvement in quality of life. And for half of the individuals, we had clinically meaningful improvement in walking ability.
Yeah, it's amazing. I've seen the video. I've seen the videos of some of the patients that you had that has been able to walk a lot better.
Those videos it's amazing?
It's fantastic. It's especially like I think for those who haven't heard about MS, and I'm certainly not an expert, but from my understanding, I mean, there's nothing you can do, right, to make it. I mean, Well,
it's a very difficult disease, and it's also an unpredictable disease. In the relapse remitting phase, you get worse, you get better. Scientists aren't really sure what's making people worse. They aren't really sure what's making them better. The treatments all focus on turning off inflammation, and there are drugs that are really very good at that, but they're not very good at stopping the brain volume loss. And they're not as good at preventing this slow accumulation of disability. And some folks, like me, have a more rapid decline. Although, in retrospect, my symptoms began 20 years before I was diagnosed.
Yeah.
And so getting into the progressive phase within 15 years of diagnosis is not uncommon. So you can say being in the progressive phase within 3 years of diagnosis, that's very fast. But of course, I had been symptomatic for 20 years before then. And for some people, it does take 10 to 20 years to finally get a diagnosis.
Yeah, yeah. How was it like for you? I mean, I've also seen that you tried taking some supplements before, and then you stopped, and then you couldn't get out of bed, and then you started taking supplements again, and then you could get out of bed again. How was that moment like for you?
Like, oh my God, it was thrilling.
Yeah.
It's really pretty funny. I certainly am a conventional doc. I absolutely believe in the best science. I believe in the best drugs and technology. So, of course, I went down the drug route.
Yeah.
And then when I realized, like, man, how bad this is, and I started reading the basic science and decided, okay, I'll start experimenting on myself. And I, devised this little cocktail.
Yeah.
And after 6 months, and I couldn't see any difference, I just thought, I'm just wasting my money. This is crazy. So I stopped everything.
Yeah.
And then, at 36 hours, I realized, man, I am just completely exhausted. I just really couldn't get out of bed. I certainly couldn't go to work. And so I thought, well, maybe I'm getting a cold, a virus. A couple days into this, I'm getting worse. And my wife came in and said, I think you haven't been taking your supplements. You ought to take them again. So I took them all that night.
She wasn't the one who told you to, was it?
Yeah.
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 Okay.
She was on top of it. So
it's good to have a good wife.
It's good to have a good wife. Absolutely. So I took them, and then the next morning, I clearly felt better.
Yeah.
And I had more energy. I could get up and go to work. And I was like, wow, that is really interesting.
Yeah.
So 2 weeks later, I stopped them all. And at 36 hours again, my energy crashed and I just couldn't really get out of bed. And so I waited till the third day and took them all again and felt, wow, I am remarkably better, and bounced back up, went to work. And so at that point, I was just so thrilled that I'm figuring stuff out that my neurology team isn't telling me about, my primary care team is not telling me about. But I am very excited now, even more excited than I was about reading the basic science, thinking about what are the nutrients, what are the things that are under my control.
Yeah.
And now, this is, at first I focused on supplements. Then eventually I would start reading more and think more about the stress reducing practice literature. And, because I'd been an athlete before going to medical school, I had been, I certainly understood on a visceral level that I had to keep exercising, moving, doing strength training, swimming, as long as I could to maintain function as well as I could.
Yeah.
So that was the one thing I had done absolutely right from the very beginning.
Right. I mean, it must with when you have a diagnosis, when you only get worse, and when I can only imagine. I have no idea how it was like for you, but I can only imagine like when you see the first glimpse of hope. It must have been like that, almost like you can okay, I can actually affect this.
And keep in mind, I had been told by my neurology team since the beginning that when you're in the progressive phase, the goal is to slow decline because we know you can't recover. So keep in mind, all the stuff that I did throughout this healing journey was not aimed at recovery because I knew that wasn't possible.
Yeah, exactly.
It was simply aimed at slowing my decline.
Yeah.
So that I could be as functional as I could for as long as possible.
Yeah. I mean, I think it's such a remarkable story, and especially, somebody like yourself who actually have the knowledge to be able to go in and actually apply the basic science, the new cutting edge science, and apply it to your own life and actually see the effects. That's it's pretty remarkable.
Yes, it is very, very, very remarkable. The other thing that is interesting, Andrea. So, I'm up walking around for the first time in years with my walking sticks. I'm in the hospital. I began to be able to walk a little bit in the neighborhood, around the block. And because when you have a progressive illness, part of the accommodation is that you learn to take each day one day at a time. You don't know what the future will bring. So I've experienced this remarkable improvement, but I'm still living one day at a time because I don't know what it means. It wasn't until the day that I got on my bike and I biked around the block that I knew deep in my heart that, okay, the current understanding of progressive multiple sclerosis is incomplete.
Yeah.
And that no one knows how much recovery might be achievable.
Yeah. And I also saw that you mentioned somewhere or something, I think you wrote it in your book, that you also changed your perspective. I think you already mentioned, but to change your perspective that you have to get down to the cellular level and build your cells up, and that will bring you and that is
your
what
health.
brings health. Yeah.
Yeah, actually that sort of evolved as I was reading the basic science and I started drilling down on I have to restore my mitochondria. And so then at first I was looking for drug studies. Then, fortunately I had the aha, like, you can't use drugs. What you're going to have to do is figure out what are the nutrients your mitochondria need and be sure that you are giving your cells all the nutrients that you need. So that's when I was down to the identifying what were the nutrients and getting a bigger list of supplements. And then, and I'm still thinking, mitochondria, what are the nutrients mitochondria need. And then I flipped my switch into what are the foods that contain these nutrients, because the foods are vastly more complicated, and they probably provide many more nutrients that my cells need that science hasn't even named yet, let alone had any insight to have these studies. That's really when what I was doing now was really combining what I was learning through the basic science, functional medicine, the ancestral health movement, to create this comprehensive diet and lifestyle program that's not aimed so much for the organism, but aimed for what could it do for cellular function.
Exactly. Yeah, I think it's regarding. I mean, you mentioned that you've done 5 studies now with your protocol. What does what does your studies say? Or what does your study say?
So we'll sort of go through the first one. We have just a huge amount of data that we collected. We enrolled people with secondary primary progressive MS. At that time, there was very limited treatment options for them. And we did quality of life measures. So there's this dramatic improvement in quality of life that we achieve over the first year. And we have year 2 and year 3 data that we're finally analyzing from that study this summer, so I'll have more on that in the future. We collected MRIs, and we have been waiting to try and find a control group to compare the MRI changes to. So we finally have got that found. So I'll be able to talk about the changes in the MRI that we saw over time for our group and compare that to a control group. So that data is yet coming. We're able to show that some people achieved remarkable improvement in hand function and walking function during that 12 months. And we also show that half did not improve. And we could see that the people who were more likely to improve their motor function were those who had been able to do more of the exercise intervention. And that sort of makes sense that you have to improve the diet, improve the stress reduction, yes. But if you want to grow muscles, you're going to have to use them. And so the people who were more willing or capable of exercising saw more motor benefits. We did not have the ability to measure force generation. So it may be that the folks who had not yet improved their walking speed, which is the very gross measure or walking distance that we could measure, it may be that they had, I expect that they probably had, most of them, been able to improve their force generation. But we hadn't, depending on the depth of the disability and loss, it may take a longer time period to be able to see the ability to have the muscle be stronger, translate into walking faster. The reason I bring that up is that more scientists, since our first publications came out, have joined me in studying the use of electrical stimulation of muscles with people who are actually quite severely disabled. Disabled enough that they either need a walker or are not yet really doing any independent walking. And they measure the ability to generate force and quality of life in the folks who just did the E-stim. And they're able to show, like us, improvement in quality of life, improvement in mood, and they measured how much force you could generate in the muscles. In the quadriceps muscles, and I think also the hamstrings. So these are important muscles on the thigh, and they showed that people could, in fact, generate more force over time, and that E-stim, or electrical stimulation of muscles, where you're using electrical current applied through patches on the skin to help drive a stronger muscle contraction. The beauty of that, Andre, is that muscle and muscle activation sends really important hormonal signals to our body in terms of how we use insulin and how we control blood sugar and blood lipids. And so if people don't exercise, they have higher blood sugar and their lipid profiles become less and less healthy.
Yeah.
So I'm a huge advocate, even if you cannot walk anymore, that I think there's a tremendous benefit for doing electrical stimulation of muscles to help reduce the harm of inactivity.
Right. Yeah. So you've done a couple of studies, and they seem promising. And when you look back, as we talked about before, when you looked at like your story, when you got the diagnosis and then you got worse, and then you created this program that from science. And then one of the big things like in the program that I've understood that you're focusing on is the mitochondria.
Yes.
So for those that haven't heard about the mitochondria, or have heard about it but not really sure what it is or what it does, like what is mitochondria in a nutshell?
Oh, yeah. So we talk about this being the power plant for our cells, and this really, the journey of mitochondria began about 1.5 billion years ago, when the oxygen level rose in the planet, in our atmosphere, and that actually killed off about 95% of all life forms.
Right.
But fortunately for us, due to the random mutations that occur, there were some bacteria that developed the biochemical sequences that let us utilize oxygen more effectively to make the energy called ATP. And these ancient bacteria would become the foremothers of our mitochondria. And because now all of our cells have these ancient bacteria, these mitochondria, that let us use oxygen much more effectively to convert the food we eat, which gets made into blood sugars, which then is used to make adenosine triphosphate, which our cells can use to drive all of the chemistry that we need to do to stay alive.
Right. Is it kind of that the mitochondria takes energy in form of glucose and then also use oxygen, and then kind of makes energy that for the cells, kind of?
Right. It makes energies that our cells can use in a very controlled fashion, so that our cells could then take that energy stored in ATP to use the energy that we use, let's say, to make antibodies against the virus that we're all trying to fight now in this pandemic, or to make the compounds we need to repair my bones if I break a bone, or to make the energy I need so I can process our language, so you and I can talk to one another. All of that requires a lot of energy.
So it's kind of like the battery in some kind of technical tool or something that needs the battery to be able to for the tool to function and to do what it's supposed to do, kind of.
It's the battery. You could also think of it as the currency of life.
Yeah.
It is the money generator, so we can spend our money to exist and to do all the things that our bodies and cells need to do to exist.
Right. And like the mitochondria, why would you say, like, why is it, in a nutshell, why is it important to focus to help our mitochondria?
Because the parts of your body that needs the most energy to work, let's say your brain, your heart, and the retina of your eyes to operate the movie camera that our eyes are.
Yeah.
We have about 5,000 to 10,000 mitochondria per cell in the brain, in the retina, and in the heart. And so if those mitochondria begin to not work quite as efficiently, then my brain will suffer, and I'll have more trouble with pain. I'll have more trouble with my mood. I'll have more anxiety, more depression. I'll be more irritable. I'll be much more easily offended by whatever silly remarks I hear around the world. I won't be able to see as well, and I'll have more heart damage.
Yeah.
So it's sort of the difference, if your mitochondria are working at full capacity doing a great job, or if they're working only at 70% capacity or 50% capacity.
And how important? Because this seems to really be really important when you have MS. How important are the mitochondria for a quote unquote healthy person?
Well, so for a lot of healthy folks are assuming that the changes they're experiencing are part of, well, I'm getting older. Maybe I'm not supposed to have boundless energy when I'm 35 or 45. Maybe I'm supposed to need a lot of energy shots in energy drinks, a lot of caffeine to get through the day. So these changes come on slowly, and we attribute it to, well, I'm just getting older. And people may not realize that there's slight decline in athletic performance or with their memory performance, or maybe even with their sexual performance, because they're losing libido, desire. They attribute it to aging. What's really going on is that their cellular health is not as robust as it should be. Because out in the wild, when humans are nutritionally sound, everything works well into our 70s and 80s. And I'm talking everything: thinking, mood, physical activity, sexual activity. It does not decline in your 20s, 30s, and 40s. You don't need energy drinks. And far too many parts of our society are accepting this gradual decline in performance in all those domains as normal aging. And if that is not normal aging, that is pathologic aging, because we have poor cellular health.
Right. So what you're basically saying is that aging, what we're calling aging, isn't really normal. It's more that our cells are not getting what they need.
Absolutely. And this is where, and I talk about this in my book. I talk about this in my courses that I teach. That what I've done is I've combined the principles of evolutionary biology, ancestral health, functional medicine, my review of the basic science, to create this diet and lifestyle protocol to optimize cellular function. And what that does is restore healthy aging, which in many cases makes people feel and look 10 to 15 years younger than they had felt before, because when you get the cells working well again, you discover you don't need those energy drinks. You discover your energy and quality of life improves. And, it's very fun to have people line up their photos and see, like, oh my gosh, I am looking younger.
Yeah.
We can't, I have not figured out how to stop the graying of the hair. If your hair is grayed, I can't change that. But I certainly appear to be able to change the aging on your face. That is very consistent.
And let's say that a person would like to even optimize their mitochondria, let's say, with things that like an everyday person have access to. So if a person would like to optimize their mitochondria with things that everybody can have access to, what do you think are the most important things?
Well, you want to improve the quality of your diet. So first thing to start with is to get rid of the sugar and get rid of the foods that dump a lot of blood sugar into your blood right away. So get rid of breads, pastas, whipped potatoes, have more vegetables. That'll be a great start. Then the other things that I would do, again, this will depend. If you're healthy, you could add some high intensity interval training and some strength training, physical activity. That will be really helpful. And then the third thing I would do would be to add some intermittent fasting, so that, because our ancestors, Andrea, we did not have access to food continuously all the time.
Yeah.
And we had to work incredibly hard to get our food and then incredibly hard to process and cook it. So the men in the clan, the Andres and all of your fathers and grandfathers, ancestral
Lennart
fathers,
and Johan.
were out there working really hard and probably 2 to 6 hours, 8 hours in a day getting that food for us, for the clan. So you had burned through all of your stored carbohydrates in the liver. That's called glycogen. And you were in ketosis because your ancestral fathers were working so hard getting the food for us. The ancestral mothers were working really hard, keeping control of the few kids that were around, gathering some food. And sometimes the mothers got the food in the small nets and they did a better job than the guys. But they were clearly working, although perhaps a little bit differently than when the ancestral fathers were. The food gets back, and the moms are continuing to work hard, procuring all that food and converting it and cooking it. So now everybody's resting and eating and feasting, and then you're out of food, and the whole cycle starts. So we go from being in a not sugar burning state, a fat burning state, because of physical activity or absence of food. And then we go into a fed state where we have enough food for a few days.
Yeah.
And then we go back into not enough food, either because we're working so hard, we're burning up all the food that we have stored in our body and we're in ketosis, or we just don't have any food because we've eaten it all and we're in ketosis because of absence of food. So this cycling back and forth between having, plenty of food and rest and having to work hard for our food and then being able to eat again. So I think anyone could do this. You could extend the time you're not eating, first 12 hours, then maybe 14 hours, then maybe 16 hours, then maybe occasionally a 24-hour fast. You could do that as frequently as you like, whether that is something you do once a week or a couple times a week or every day. I think that is a very helpful strategy. And you can do that whether you're a vegetarian, whether you're a vegan, Mediterranean diet eater, paleo eater, or even a ketogenic eater. I think that is a very helpful, very easy strategy.
And that is also something that affects the mitochondria.
Yes, your mitochondria. Actually, that signal tells your mitochondria to make more mitochondria.
Really?
And so that is very helpful. It increases the number of mitochondria. And it also causes the mitochondria to sort of do a little spring house cleaning and sort of refreshes the mitochondria as well. So it improves the number and it improves the efficiency of how the mitochondria function.
That's interesting.
It is very helpful. This process of sort of the cellular spring cleaning, where that goes through and digests and eats up the parts of the cell that are not working well, it's called autophagy, is really a very helpful strategy for making that cell function more effectively. Mm. It euthans the cell. It is just phenomenal. And probably again, our ancestral mothers and fathers, as they're having, the random mutations that occur when our cells divide and you go on to the next generation, those mutations that made the person more resilient in face of this intermittent switching between burning fat and burning sugar, those mutations that were most efficient in that environment had better survivorship. So over time, all of our ancestral mothers and fathers would get more effectively adapted to having to switch back and forth between burning fat and burning sugar in our mitochondria, which is why I think this is probably the superior eating pattern for all of us, because from an evolutionary standpoint, for millions of years, that was a very important evolutionary pressure on us, was that we had to be able to survive really well, cycling between working really hard to get food and then having a few days to enjoy it.
Right. So intermittent fasting seems to be a really good strategy for general health and mitochondria. What you also mentioned there in the beginning there, when we started talking about what we could do for our mitochondria, was also diet, where you said that you're supposed to reduce the amount of, bad carbs. But I was also wondering about, like, what is it that is good to eat when it comes to helping the mitochondria?
Yes. Well, I love that part too. So thank you for asking. So things that are really important. If you remember our mitochondria from high school biology, there's this little oval, and then there's a little squiggly line inside the mitochondria. The oval on the outside, the squiggly lines on the inside are membranes, and membranes are fat structures. So the mitochondria is packed with fat, so it's really important to have good, healthy fats. And part of that membrane is going to have cholesterol in it, and omega-6 fatty acids and omega-3 fatty acids. So we need cholesterol. We do need some fats from nuts and seeds, and we need some fats from grass-fed, grass-finished animals, wild game, wild fish. So fats are important. We also need foods that are really high in B vitamins. So lots of greens would be really good for that. Liver would be really good for that. And then the work of mitochondria generates some toxic trash, just like every chemical plant. There's not a chemical plant in the world that doesn't have a little bit of toxic trash happening.
Right.
And a very helpful way of thinking about this toxic trash is you want to have colorful foods, because they're very, very rich in these antioxidants that help deal with that toxic trash. And so to figure out, is something deeply colorful, I instructed my patients, just cut it down the middle. If the pigment or the color goes all the way through, it meets that colored category. So beets, carrots, berries, oranges would be really nice examples. A pear, an apple, a banana are white all the way through. They have a lot of starch in them. They're very sugary. I don't count them in the colored category. I'll count peaches, apricots, watermelon, berries in that colored category instead. And then the third big category that I talk a lot about are the sulfur-containing vegetables. That's the cabbage family. So turnips, rutabagas, radishes, cabbage. There's also garlic in there. So garlic, onions, chives, shallots, and then mushrooms. These foods very rich in sulfur, and sulfur is important for some of the enzymes in that mitochondria. That's also really important for the ability for the body to eliminate and process a lot of toxins. And toxins can be poisons for the mitochondria and poisons for the brain. So that's part of why I want sulfur. So the big categories here are greens, as in green leafy vegetables, sulfur-rich vegetables, and deeply pigmented vegetables, healthy fats, and for that, some nuts and seeds, grass-fed, grass-finished meats, wild game, according to what your finances can afford. And then, I have strategies for meat eaters and for non-meat eaters, for people who are declining to eat meat because of spiritual beliefs, or perhaps because of economic realities that we have to help them figure out how to do this in a more cost efficient way because of severe financial constraints.
Right. What advice do you give to those that don't eat meat?
Well, so things that we have to think about is they're going to need more omega-3, omega-6 fats. The vegetarian sources of omega-3 fats are less efficient than the animal sources, so then they have to eat actually 10 times as much vegetarian omega-3 fats as the animal omega-3 fats.
Right.
So I talk about some supplement strategies for them. We want to measure their B12 levels and their homocysteine levels and potentially supplement that. I may have to monitor their iodine and mineral status a bit more closely. And the other thing we really have to teach them is how to construct a complete protein. Because some people decide to stop eating meat for spiritual reasons, but don't know how to design a nutritionally sound vegetarian diet. So we take care of that. And many people, because of the time pressures we have, just trying to get by, having to perhaps work 2 or 3 jobs to exist, don't know how to cook anymore.
Yeah.
Don't have time to cook. So we teach making menus, we teach shopping, we teach cooking. And I'm mindful that if people are having a lot of time pressure, the meals have to be simple, easy, and that you can make them within those very serious time constraints.
For sure, and I also seen that I can't remember exactly the book title, but I think wasn't it the Wahls Protocol Diet for Life or something like that you made also for.
So we have the Wahls Protocol Cooking for Life.
Cooking for Life.
So that's a cookbook that is just phenomenal. And my intent there is to teach people these basic skills of how to cook and how to cook with simple ingredients.
Yeah.
Because my patients that I've taken care of for decades at the VA often are disabled, unable to work, living on fixed incomes, shopping in small rural grocery stores, and we taught them how to do this. So if people try to tell me that they can't do the Wahls diet because they're not wealthy, I'm like, well, yeah. We were very successful at teaching people how to do this who were not wealthy, who were living very humbly.
Yeah.
But we did have to teach them how to cook.
Yeah.
And we also had to teach them how to shop and how to plan their menus.
Right. I think one thing that I didn't really understand until I saw your TEDx video was, I mean, I'm from Sweden. We don't use cups and that kind of stuff.
Oh yeah.
But basically, so. How much? Because I think you in your TEDx talk you mentioned that you need to eat pretty much 3 big plates of vegetables a day.
Yeah, so the goal is, I don't want people to be hungry. If you're hungry, you're going to fail on this diet.
Yeah, yeah.
So we want you to have enough food. If you're hungry, eat more food, but eat what's allowable. If you're a very petite person, I don't expect you to over-consume beyond what your appetite would have you consume. Another way of thinking about this is that I want you to have 3 plates of food, big dinner plates, in your day. And you could imagine 1/4 of the plate is going to be your protein source. And the other 3/4 can be dispersed between the greens, the sulfur-rich vegetables, and the deeply colored vegetables and berries. And you have as many plates as you need to feel appropriately satiated or full during the day.
Right.
I'm a big lady. I'm 6 foot tall, so easily that's 3 to 4 plates of food in the day. My daughter, who's much more petite, is maybe 2 plates a day to 3 plates a day. My son, who's 6'6", forgive me, I don't know what that is in meters, but probably close to 2.
No worries, yeah.
Probably close to 2 meters. Now he's a big guy. He's also quite athletic, so he's probably a 4 to 6 plate a day kind of guy.
Yeah.
So I want this to be flexible according to how your gender, your size, and the amount of athletic activity.
Right. So it's basically 3 big plates, and then according to how big you are and how tall you are and everything.
And if you're training for a triathlon or a marathon or a weightlifting job, of course you're going to have more plates than someone who has a desk job all day.
For sure. And another thing that I also saw that you mentioned, which I think is a good point, is that instead of, I mean, supplements are of course good, but what you mentioned was that also that if you eat and get your nutrients from vegetables and I mean good protein and stuff, then you're also likely to get, I mean, if not hundreds and thousands of compounds that we may not even have heard of yet because of the scientific progression.
Our ancestral mothers and fathers, wherever you were, whether you were in Sweden or North America, South America, Australia, Africa, they very consistently were eating hundreds of different plant species and animal species throughout their year. And of course, this would fluctuate according to the season and according to where the clan was at any given time. So there are literally many thousands of different dietary plans that humanity created over the millions of years that we have been in existence.
Yeah,
we have a very diverse history. We are structurally capable of eating a wide variety of plants and animal species and have reproductive success and be able to survive in widely divergent environments. That is very different than trying to eat from a tube diet, a processed diet based on just a few different plants and a few animal species.
Yeah.
That if we narrow what we eat, we are likely starving our microbiome. We are likely starving our cells of key elements that over millions of years we needed in order to thrive. So, I mean, it's another concept that I stress is the goal is to have 200 different plant species that you've consumed in the year, and ideally hundreds of different animal species in the year. The data on how many different animal species we need is not as clear, at least I don't know that as clear, but I want people to have diversity, both in your animal species and in your plant species, because from an evolutionary standpoint, that's what our microbiome expects. That's what our cellular chemistry expects. And I think the robustness of our health will be greatly improved.
I think that's a very good point. Before we get off, I would also really like to mention, I mean, the books that you've written, and I know that I know that you also made a revised copy. So perhaps you could just tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah. So the revised copy, you'll know that you've gotten it when you see that there's the blue stripe across the top, revised and expanded. And what I've done is I've updated this. I've talked about the new research that we've done. We talk about some changes in the diet. I explain histamine, oxalates, FODMAPs. I talk much more about ketosis, the benefits of ketosis, but in fact, we now know there are many, many ways to get in ketosis, and that I want the kind of monitoring I want people to use to just help guide which strategy to get in ketosis is best for them. We talk about stem cells and where the research is at for using stem cells to treat serious autoimmune conditions. And then importantly, Andrea, what we do with our diet and lifestyle that kills our stem cells, or better yet, rejuvenates them and increases the number of stem cells that we have, so they will be able to repair you and youthen you more effectively. And I talk a lot more about the science of behavior change, why it is so hard for us to create new healthy behaviors, and why it's so hard for us to extinguish some of these disease-causing behaviors that we have, and strategies then to help you be more successful at creating the behaviors that you want and extinguishing the behaviors that you want to get rid of. So all in all, it's about a third new material. I think it's just absolutely phenomenal. So I love my first book, but this, of course, is an even much better, much more useful book.
For sure. For sure, I haven't read it all, but I really think it's. I mean, you both have like the overview, but it's also quite detailed. So I think it's a great book for anybody who, I mean, or if you have MS, then of course it's a no-brainer. But it's also good for people who doesn't have MS, because I think it's a very, very good detailed book about a lot of stuff that I mean, that's for everyone.
So it's certainly in our clinics, we've been able to have this remarkable transformation for a wide variety of autoimmune problems: inflammatory bowel disease, rheumatoid arthritis, systemic lupus, myasthenia gravis. We've had great help for people who are having issues with brain fog, anxiety, depression, irritability, people with diabetes, obesity, heart disease. We normalize their blood sugar, their blood pressure. They're able to simplify, get off many drugs. And then the other thing that I find really interesting is athletes are reaching out to me because they've picked up the book, implemented the principles, and improved their athletic performance.
That's interesting. But I mean, it really makes sense, though, right? I mean, everybody, for everybody. I mean, if your body works better, then of course you will be able to, or not, of course, but it really makes sense that you can increase your performance then as well.
Yes. So it improves your athletic performance if your mitochondria are more effective, because your mitochondria have to generate the energy your muscles will use to either run faster or lift bigger weights.
For sure. Terry, it's been a real honor talking to you. And I mean, when I was reading before this conversation, I read. I mean, of course, I looked at your book, and I also looked at some talks, and it's. I think it's really incredible how many people you've already helped with your TEDx talk, with your books, and I read some reviews as well of people who really had their life changed. So, yeah.
Yeah. The other thing we've been doing that's so exciting is we're now training health professionals, and we're doing that all over the globe. I don't yet know if I have anyone in Sweden yet, but we have a training program to train other physicians, chiropractors, physical therapists, nutrition professionals, mental health professionals, how to use these concepts in their clinical practices. So that's a very exciting development, because my goal is to get these concepts out to create this epidemic of health, and so I need to have more health professionals and more of the public using these concepts in their clinical practice and in their everyday lives.
For sure. So yeah, thank you for the work that you do. It's really phenomenal work. So yeah, big thank you for that.
Yeah. And we have a great little handout for people who want to learn more about just a very simple overview of the diet at terrywahls.com/diet. It's a one-page handout they can put up on your refrigerator or in your kitchen to inspire you with a very simple overview of a few key concepts.
Sounds great. And if people would like to come in contact with, the stuff that you do, do you have a website? Do you have some social media accounts?
So if you go to terrywahls.com, you'll learn more about everything that we offer. If you want to get certified, you can learn more about that in the training program there. And that's terrywahls.com/certification. If you want to follow me on social media, on my Instagram account, Dr. Terry Wahls, Terry, Wahls, Wahls, you'll see what I'm eating most days. You'll get short, inspiring messages. My wife manages that account, and it's very fun. On my Facebook and on my Twitter, that's at Terry Wahls. Again, you'll hear me comment about some of the latest science. And again, short positive messages. And again, I really encourage everyone to get that handout at terrywahls.com/diet. You'll get the handout, and then you'll also get subscribed to our email. The beauty of the email is every week I go through clinical trials, basic science, what's new in behavioral medicine, dietary medicine. And I have literally hundreds of studies that I read through and provide a little summary commentary on that, along with lots of other great tips and information about how we can use diet and lifestyle to age much more healthily and to reverse the ravages of chronic disease.
Sounds great. I'm actually going to, I didn't know that myself. I'm going to go in there and check that out myself. Terry, yeah. Terry, once again, big thank you for coming on and sharing your knowledge. I sure learned a lot, and I know that the people out there listening also really learned a lot. So big thank you for coming on.
Thank you.
Hope you enjoyed the episode. Friends, I really need your help. I'm trying to get the podcast out there. So I was wondering if you could help me by leaving a positive rating and a review on your Apple device or the podcast player that you're using, as well as subscribing to the podcast. That really helps getting the show more visible on iTunes and other players. And if you don't know how it's done, then YouTube has a lot of great videos, so you can search there. All right, that's it. Take care. This podcast is for general informational purposes only and does not constitute the practice of medicine, including the giving of medical advice. The content of this podcast is not intended to be a substitute for professional medical advice, diagnosis, or treatment.